Hello, my name is Jan Chapetta, and I am the lead teacher in a 4-year-old preschool classroom located in Lombard, Illinois. I currently have a roster of 13 students. This is my presentation of our culturally responsive library project. On the first two slides, you could see pie charts based on the audit categories of classroom demographics. I included a breakdown underneath to provide more explanations. As you can see, I have one more student that is female than male. A majority of my classroom is white, with my other 3 students being African American, Asian American, and Arab. All of my students live in the suburbs, and there are only a few of the families have different family structures and speak another language other than English. To provide a better visual, I included a picture of my classroom library on this slide. As you can see, I have a large classroom library. For the assignment, I picked out 50 books at random with some considerations in mind. The next slide is a breakdown of the 7 topics I chose to investigate more, including the mandatory ones of gender and race. The 5 topics I chose were for a variety of reasons. Later in this presentation, I will go over my reasons as I explain the data I collected. On this slide, I provide a graph of the data I collected for the gender of characters in the books. As you can see, the majority of my books have female characters and male characters is slightly under. My classroom does not have any books of non-gender specific characters. There were 11 books with non-human characters. The second graph shows the data for main characters with that gender. Once again, there were more female characters than male characters. This is a mirror into my classroom because I have more female characters than male characters. This slide goes over the race of the characters in my classroom library. As I looked over the books, I noticed diversity, which is something I've been working on accomplishing for some time. Most of my books had white character representation, and the second highest was African American characters. There's a slight difference of one character between Asian American and Latin, with Asian American characters being represented more, 15 times. The second graph provided a visual of the main character's race. Most of the book's main characters were only non-human, then African American. The lowest race representation of main characters was Asian Americans. By looking at the graphs, I noticed most of my classroom library has different races in one book, and a few have main characters. On this slide, I arranged pictures of the books I took based on the race characteristics. The next 5 slides go over the topics I chose to investigate further. I chose this topic of are set in suburban areas because it represents my classroom the most. All of my students live in the suburban area. As I look at my classroom library audit, this was the highest category out of the setting section at 22%, or 11 out of 50 books. On the setting part of the audit we did a few weeks ago, this topic of are set in rural areas was shown the second most out of the 3 different setting types. This is the reasoning I chose to evaluate this topic. None of my students live in rural areas, so there is no section on the pie graph for my classroom. 9 out of 50 books, so 18% had a setting of a rural area. On this slide, the 5th topic I chose to evaluate is shown: children with disabilities. I believe children should understand we all have similarities, but there are differences as well, and that is okay. One form of representation I find it important for my children to know about is people with disabilities. That is the reasoning I chose this topic. There are no students in my classroom who have a disability, so this is the reasoning. There is no data shown on the pie graph. I only had one book out of 50, so 2% that had a character with disabilities. This is something I would like to improve upon inside my classroom, and we'll discuss how later in this presentation. This slide represents the sixth topic I have chosen to evaluate: family structure other than mother, father, and 2 children. This is an area where I had representation of my students inside my classroom, so I wanted to see how the books I have in my library compare to it. My classroom is made up of 15%, or 2 out of 13 students, with a family structure of other than one mother, one father, and 2 children. I had one book out of the 52% of the total. This is why the area on the pie graph is smaller. On this slide, the last topic I would like to evaluate is represented: languages other than English, characters who speak languages other than English. There are 2 families inside my classroom, 15%, that speak another language besides English. I only have one book, 2% of the total I looked at, that is of different language. This book does not create a mirror for my students because it is of a language these students don't speak. This is why I would like to improve this area of my classroom library by including books that represent them, along with teaching my students about other cultures. In the next slide, I will explain more on how I would like to make this improvement. On this slide are the areas I would like to improve in my classroom library, along with explanations. I believe it is important for children to have representations of disabilities within the classroom library to provide a window effect. This is one area of improvement for my classroom library. A book I found is called In My Mosque. This also adds another representation of Arab characters. 2 other books that can improve this area are I Am Different, The Same as You, and Ali and the Sea Stars. In the past, I have had families who fit in the family structure of LGBTQ+, and after looking at my classroom library, I noticed there is no representation. The book I found to start my improvement in the area are called 'Twas the Night Before Pride, Love Makes a Family, and Mama, Mommy, and Me. My areas of improvement are now continued on. Having books in my languages can be beneficial to a child's overall development, in my opinion. I currently only have one book in another language, which is in Spanish. I would like to add books in my students' home languages to create a mirror effect for them. To do this, I found a book called Who Are We? Inside this book, the text is written in other languages, along with English. I also found 2 other books, Luli and the Language of Tea, and Happy Within. This is my final slide to my presentation. I would like to explain how my classroom library provides mirror and window effects for my students. My classroom is mostly girls, and my library has a higher number of female characters, which is a mirror of my classroom. Another way my library is a mirror is according to race. A majority of my classroom is white, and most of the books I have characters with this race. I also have representation of the other races, which is a mirror effect for these students and a window for my other students. These books allow my students to see each other. There are other ways my library causes window effects. The first is representation of other types of people and families. Inside one of the books, my students see characters with disabilities and other family structures unlike their own. Another window effect is through languages. My students get to see the differences of writing of words inside these books. When I was looking through the books, I also saw representation of poverty through illustrations in one of the books. This is something else that is a window for my students. Overall, I believe my students have a good balance between mirrors and windows inside the classroom. Thank you everyone for listening, and also for a great session.